I'm Samantha, 34 years old, and throughout my life, I've been the responsible one while my brother Jason basked in the golden child glow. When our father died, I expected fairness after years of supporting our family. Instead, at the will reading, my parents left everything to Jason. "Your brother deserves it," my mother said coldly, watching my world crumble. The ultimate irony? 1 month later, her text lit up my phone. "The mortgage is due." While I gather my thoughts to share how this inheritance betrayal unfolded, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and subscribe to follow my journey. You won't believe how I transformed this family crisis into the most valuable lesson we've ever learned. Growing up in suburban Chicago, my childhood looked picture perfect from the outside. Our modest two-story home with the white picket fence housed what neighbors called that nice family: my father Richard, a dedicated accountant at a mid-sized firm, my mother Diana, a third-grade teacher at the local elementary school, my brother Jason, 3 years my senior, and me. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable in our middle-class existence, with annual summer vacations to Wisconsin and Christmas mornings that were always generous, if not extravagant. But within those walls, a subtle dynamic took root early. Jason, with his outgoing personality and athletic build, captured our parents' attention in a way my quieter, more studious nature never could. I noticed it first in elementary school when Jason's C+ in math warranted celebration and ice cream because he really tried this time, while my straight A report card received a cursory glance and a distracted, "That's what we expect from you, Samantha." By middle school, the pattern was firmly established. I still remember sitting at our kitchen table, hands shaking with excitement as I showed my father my perfect SAT score. He nodded, said "good job," and returned to his newspaper. 2 weeks later, when Jason's college acceptance letter arrived, despite his thoroughly average grades, my parents threw a party, inviting extended family and friends to celebrate their son's achievement. I learned to find validation elsewhere, in teachers' praise, in scholarship offers, in the quiet satisfaction of academic excellence. But I never stopped craving my parents' recognition, their pride, their simple acknowledgement that I too was worthy of celebration. Everything changed when I was 16. My father collapsed in our living room one Sunday afternoon, clutching his chest. While my mother froze and Jason panicked, I calmly called 911, described the symptoms to the dispatcher, and even remembered to grab my father's medication list before the ambulance arrived. The heart attack was severe but not fatal, and during his recovery, I stepped up in ways no teenager should have to, managing household bills, cooking meals, helping my mother navigate insurance paperwork. "I don't know what we'd do without you, Samantha," my mother said one evening, and for a moment, I felt seen. But as soon as my father recovered, the old patterns reasserted themselves, and Jason once again became the center of the family universe. When college decisions came around, I had my pick of prestigious universities with substantial scholarship offers. But my father's health remained precarious, and my mother's worried glances told me what she wouldn't say aloud: they needed me close. So I chose the University of Chicago, just a 30-minute train ride from home, turning down Cornell and Yale. Jason, meanwhile, attended an expensive out-of-state university, his tuition straining the family finances despite his mediocre grades. I majored in business with a focus on finance, working part-time throughout college to minimize my student loans while maintaining a 3.9 GPA. After graduation, I secured a position at a respected financial firm and began my steady climb through the corporate ranks. My financial stability became a resource for my family. When my mother needed unexpected dental surgery costing $8,000, I covered it without hesitation. When the family home needed a new roof and heating system, I provided the $12,000 loan that my parents never quite managed to repay. Meanwhile, Jason bounced from job to job, each one beginning with enthusiasm that quickly faded when the work became challenging or monotonous. He started a graphic design business that folded within 6 months, then an app development company that never launched a single product, then a sports memorabilia shop that hemorrhaged money for 2 years before closing. After each failure, he would retreat to our parents' home, where my mother would console him with home-cooked meals and reassurances that the right opportunity just hasn't come along yet. By my early 30s, I had risen to vice president of financial operations at a thriving tech company. My relationship with my partner Alex provided the support and recognition I'd always craved. Alex saw the toxic family dynamic with the clarity of an outsider and gently encouraged me to establish healthier boundaries with my parents and Jason. "They take advantage of you," Alex would say after I'd spend hours on the phone helping my parents navigate their retirement accounts or advising Jason on yet another business idea. "They expect everything from you and nothing from him." I knew Alex was right, but family loyalty runs deep. When my company offered me a promotion that required relocating to Boston, I took it with a mix of excitement and guilt. The 6-hour drive from Boston to Chicago meant I couldn't drop everything to solve family problems at a moment's notice, but I still made the trip at least once a month, prioritizing my family over my own comfort and convenience. The distance helped me gain perspective, but it also created space for Jason to spin narratives about my absence, my success, my priorities. I didn't realize just how effectively he'd been painting me as the villain in my own family story until it was too late. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October. I was preparing for a quarterly budget presentation when my phone lit up with my mother's name. "Your father's had a stroke," she said, her voice thin and brittle. "It's bad, Samantha. The doctors are saying, they're saying we should prepare ourselves." I didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way," I promised, already emailing my team about a family emergency. Within 2 hours, I'd booked a flight, packed a bag, and arranged to work remotely for as long as necessary. The entire flight to Chicago, I clutched my armrests, silently bargaining with the universe to keep my father alive until I could reach him. When I arrived at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, my mother sat alone in the waiting room, her face drawn and pale. "Where's Jason?" I asked, setting down my suitcase. "He's coming," she said vaguely. "He has some work things to wrap up first." I swallowed my frustration and focused on what needed to be done. My father lay unconscious in the ICU, surrounded by beeping machines and snaking tubes. The neurologist explained the situation in gentle but unflinching terms. The stroke had caused massive bleeding in his brain, and even if he survived, severe disability was likely. For the next 48 hours, I barely left the hospital. I took detailed notes during doctor consultations, asked informed questions about treatment options, and made sure my mother ate and rested. I called my father's insurance company to verify coverage, spoke with the hospital social worker about potential rehabilitation facilities, and began researching stroke recovery resources. Jason finally arrived 3 days after the stroke, offering vague excuses about client meetings and project deadlines, despite the fact that I knew from my mother that he was currently between jobs. He spent his hospital visits scrolling through his phone or stepping out for important calls, leaving me to continue managing the medical decisions and supporting our mother. As days stretched into a week, it became clear that my father's condition wasn't improving. The doctors recommended transitioning to comfort care, and after an agonizing family discussion, we agreed. I arranged for hospice services, ensuring my father would have dignified, pain-free care in his final days. In a rare moment of consciousness, my father squeezed my hand and whispered something I couldn't quite hear. When I leaned closer, he said, "Always so capable," with what might have been a smile. Those 3 words felt like a precious gift, an acknowledgement of all I'd done and been for our family. 2 days later, with both Jason and me at his bedside, our father took his final breath. In that moment of profound loss, the sibling rivalry and parental favoritism seemed petty and irrelevant. We were just 2 children saying goodbye to their father, united in grief. The unity didn't last long. As the initial shock subsided, practical matters required attention. I contacted the funeral home, chose a casket my father would have appreciated for its understated elegance, and worked with my mother to write the obituary. The funeral costs came to just over $15,000, which I paid up front, with Jason promising to reimburse me for his share once he was more stable financially, a promise I knew from experience would likely go unfulfilled. In the days following the funeral, my mother leaned heavily on me, both emotionally and practically. I helped her notify banks, insurance companies, and government agencies of my father's death. I organized his personal belongings, helped my mother sort through his clothes for donation, and listened to her reminisce about their 42 years of marriage. Meanwhile, Jason made occasional appearances, offering hugs and platitudes before disappearing again, claiming he needed space to process his grief. I didn't begrudge him his coping mechanism. We all grieve differently, but the uneven distribution of responsibilities felt all too familiar. 2 weeks after the funeral, we gathered at my parents' longtime attorney's office for the reading of the will. I expected a straightforward division of assets, perhaps the family home to my mother, with investment accounts and personal possessions split between Jason and me. Or, given my financial stability compared to Jason's perpetual struggles, perhaps a slightly larger share for him. What I never anticipated was what actually happened. The attorney, Mr. Levinson, who had handled my parents' legal affairs for decades, seemed uncomfortable as he adjusted his glasses and began to read. My mother sat unnaturally still beside me, her hands folded tightly in her lap. I, Richard Clark, being of sound mind, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, Mr. Levinson read, proceeding through the standard legal preamble before reaching the critical section. I leave all property, assets, and possessions to my son, Jason Clark. The words didn't register at first. I waited for the continuation, and to my daughter Samantha, I leave, but it never came. Just a few more legal clauses, instructions for executing the will, and then silence. There must be some mistake, I finally said, looking between the attorney and my mother. What about me? My mother's expression hardened in a way I'd never seen before. Your brother deserves it, she said coldly. He's always struggled while you've done well for yourself. The room seemed to tilt as the implications sank in. Everything, the family home valued at approximately $575,000, my father's investment portfolio worth around $250,000. His meticulously maintained collection of classic cars worth at least $180,000. All of it now belonged to Jason. I opened my mouth to protest, to remind them of the loans I'd provided, the support I'd given, the sacrifices I'd made. But the words died in my throat as I saw the satisfied smile playing at the corners of Jason's mouth. This wasn't a mistake or an oversight. This was the culmination of a lifetime of family dynamics, the final confirmation of what I had always feared, but never fully accepted. In my parents' eyes, Jason's needs would always outweigh my contributions. Mr. Levinson shuffled his papers awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with the tension filling his office. There are some papers to sign, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. Mrs. Clark, if you could. I sat in stunned silence as my mother signed document after document, making official what still felt impossible. The entirety of my father's estate, everything he and my mother had built over decades of marriage, now belonged solely to my brother, with not so much as a keepsake set aside for me. The drive back to my hotel passed in a blur. Traffic lights changed, other cars moved around me, but I was operating on autopilot, my mind still trapped in that moment when I realized I had been completely written out of my father's will. Not just overlooked, but deliberately excluded. As soon as I reached my room, I called Alex. The moment I heard that familiar voice, the dam broke. They left everything to Jason, I sobbed, the words barely coherent. Everything. The house, the investments, Dad's cars. Like I don't even exist. Oh, Sam, Alex whispered, the shock evident even across hundreds of miles. I don't even have words. Did they explain why? Mom said Jason deserves it because he's always struggled and I'm successful. I managed between shaky breaths. As if being responsible and hardworking is a reason to be punished. That's beyond unfair, Alex said, anger creeping into his tone. After everything you've done for them? All the money you've loaned them? All the times you've dropped everything to help. The conversation continued for over an hour, Alex alternating between outrage on my behalf and attempts to comfort me. But nothing could ease the profound sense of betrayal that had settled like a stone in my chest. The next morning, I drove to my childhood home, now legally Jason's home, to collect my suitcase before flying back to Boston. I found him in the kitchen with his girlfriend Brittany, already discussing renovation plans. We're thinking of knocking down this wall, he said, gesturing expansively, not even acknowledging my red-rimmed eyes or the obvious signs that I'd spent the night crying. Open concept is really the way to go these days. Where's Mom? I asked, ignoring his remodeling ambitions. She's moving her things into the guest room, he replied casually. Britt and I are taking the master bedroom. Makes sense since it's our house now. The casual cruelty of that statement, our house now, struck me like a physical blow. This home had been in our family for 30 years. I had learned to ride a bike in the driveway, done homework at the kitchen table, celebrated birthdays and holidays within these walls. And now Jason was treating it like a property he'd purchased, with our mother relegated to guest status in her own home. I left without engaging further, afraid of what I might say if I opened my mouth. The flight back to Boston felt interminable, and when I finally reached my apartment, I moved through the following days in a fog of disbelief and hurt. A week after returning to Boston, I received a call from Eleanor Patterson, my mother's closest friend since college and something of an aunt figure to me growing up. I just wanted to check on you, sweetheart, she said. This whole situation seems, well, I was surprised, to say the least. You and me both, I replied dryly. There was a pause before Eleanor continued, her voice lowered as if sharing a confidence. You should know. Jason has been in your parents' ears for years, telling them you're too busy for family, that you only care about your career, that you've outgrown them. My stomach dropped. What? That's not true. I call every week. I visit monthly despite living hundreds of miles away. I know that, dear. But Jason has been very persuasive. He told them you refused to visit last Christmas because you were too busy with work. The accusation was laughable. I had spent Christmas Day with my parents, bringing expensive gifts and cooking the entire holiday meal while Jason showed up 3 hours late with unwrapped gift cards. But the seed of understanding was planted. Jason had been actively working to alienate me from our parents, painting himself as the devoted son and me as the uncaring daughter. That night, I called Jason directly, something I rarely did, preferring to communicate through our mother to avoid conflict. Why would you tell Mom and Dad I refused to visit last Christmas? I demanded when he answered. What? I never said that, he replied, but the slight hesitation before his denial told me everything. Eleanor told me everything, Jason. How you've been poisoning them against me for years. He dropped the pretense with surprising speed. Look, you don't need the inheritance, he snapped. You've got your fancy job and your perfect life in Boston. Mom and Dad knew I need the help more than you do. I've been helping them financially for years. I protested. I paid for Mom's surgery, the new roof, the car repairs. Yeah, because you can afford it, he interrupted. Some of us haven't had all your advantages. The conversation devolved from there, with Jason eventually hanging up on me after accusing me of being selfish and materialistic for even questioning the will. The irony was almost too much to bear. Over the following weeks, I watched via social media as Jason transformed our family home. He posted photos of my father's meticulously organized study being converted into a gaming room, the built-in bookshelves that had housed my father's beloved history books now holding gaming consoles and action figures. My mother, meanwhile, became increasingly distant. My weekly calls went to voicemail more often than not, and when we did speak, her responses were perfunctory and vague. The birthday card she had sent without fail every year since I left for college didn't arrive, another small wound in an already bleeding heart. Then, exactly 4 weeks after the will reading, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. The mortgage payment is due. We need $3,200 by Friday. I stared at the message in confusion. My parents had purchased their home in the early 90s with a 30-year mortgage. By my calculation, it should have been fully paid off 3 years ago. I called my mother immediately. "What mortgage?" I asked when she answered. "I thought the house was paid off." A long silence followed before she reluctantly explained. "We took out a new mortgage 3 years ago. There were some expenses." "What kind of expenses require a $450,000 mortgage on a house that was almost paid off?" I pressed. Another lengthy pause. "I can't discuss this now. But we need the payment by Friday or the bank will start sending notices." The conversation ended without resolution, but it planted a devastating suspicion in my mind. The inheritance that had been so cruelly denied to me wasn't wealth at all. It was debt and financial obligations that Jason had likely never bothered to investigate before smugly accepting his fortunate position. The revelation about the mortgage was just the beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, through tense phone calls with my increasingly desperate mother, I uncovered the true state of my parents' finances and, by extension, Jason's inheritance. The second mortgage on the house was just the tip of the iceberg. There were also credit card debts totaling nearly $65,000, a personal loan from my father's brother, and various other financial obligations that my parents had accumulated over the years, primarily to support Jason's series of failed businesses and personal expenses. Jason, confronted with this reality, reacted with characteristic self-centeredness. "I thought I was getting a free house," he complained during a 3-way call with our mother. No one said anything about having to make payments. As mortgage payments went unmade, the bank began sending foreclosure warnings. My mother's voicemails became increasingly frantic. "Samantha, please, we're family. You have to help us out." The irony of being excluded from the will, but expected to shoulder the financial burdens, wasn't lost on me. Still, concern for my mother, who would be homeless if the house were foreclosed upon, led me to consult with a financial advisor about the situation. The meeting revealed even more troubling information. My advisor, after reviewing the documents I'd gathered, explained that my parents had been systematically liquidating their retirement accounts and investments over the past decade. Based on these withdrawals, I'd estimate they've taken out nearly $300,000 in the past 8 years, she explained, pointing to a chart showing the declining account values. And these penalties for early withdrawal suggest they were using retirement funds, which is particularly concerning. When I pressed my mother on these findings, she finally broke down and admitted the truth. "Your father and I helped Jason start his restaurant," she said, referring to a failed venture from 5 years prior that I'd been told was funded by investors. It needed more capital than expected, $280,000 more. The revelation stunned me. My financially prudent father, who had lectured me about saving and investing since I was old enough to have an allowance, had decimated his retirement fund to pour money into Jason's ill-conceived business idea, a theme restaurant based around sports trivia that had closed within 18 months. That night, alone in my Boston apartment, I finally allowed myself to face the full truth of my family dynamic. I'd spent my entire life being punished for my competence, my success weaponized against me while Jason was rewarded for his failures. I had been the family bank, the emergency responder, the reliable one, all while being painted as uncaring and selfish behind my back. Alex found me on the kitchen floor, surrounded by financial documents, crying harder than I had since my father's death. "I've been such a fool," I sobbed as Alex held me. "I kept thinking if I just did enough, gave enough, they'd finally see me." "It's not your fault," Alex said firmly. You've been manipulated by experts your entire life. Your brother created a narrative that served him, and your parents chose to believe it because it was easier than acknowledging their own favoritism. The next day, I initiated a family conference call, determined to address the situation head-on. But my attempt at a rational discussion about financial responsibility quickly devolved when Jason began making accusations about my abandonment of the family. "You moved to Boston for your precious career," he shouted. "You've always put yourself first." "That's not fair," I countered, struggling to maintain my composure. "I've provided financial support for years. I paid for Mom's surgery, the roof repairs." "Oh, here we go with the martyr routine," Jason interrupted. "Just because you have money doesn't make you a better person." Brittany, surprisingly, broke in with an unexpected revelation. "Jason, stop it. Just tell them the truth." When he remained silent, she continued, "Jason has gambling debts. That's why he can't help with the mortgage. He owes people money." The revelation hung in the air for a long moment before my mother responded with words that cut deeper than anything that had come before. "We knew you could take care of yourself, Samantha. Jason needs us." In that moment, the truth crystallized with painful clarity. I had been punished for my competence, my independence, my success. The child who needed less had been given less love, less support, less recognition, and ultimately no inheritance, precisely because I had proven I could survive without it. The following weekend, I flew to Chicago one last time to collect personal items from my childhood home. What I found shattered what little was left of my familial illusions. My bedroom had been converted into a storage space, boxes stacked haphazardly where my bed had once stood. When I asked about my childhood mementos, photographs, yearbooks, the journals I'd kept since middle school, my mother vaguely mentioned that they might have been donated during a cleaning spree. In the garage, I discovered the truth. My academic trophies, certificates, and awards had been discarded in a garbage bin, while Jason's participation ribbons and youth sports memorabilia were carefully preserved in labeled containers. The final blow came when I flipped through the family photo albums displayed on the living room bookshelf. My college graduation photos, where I had graduated summa cum laude with dual degrees, had been removed, replaced by pictures of Jason's wedding to his first wife, a marriage that had lasted less than 2 years. Standing in that house, surrounded by physical evidence of how thoroughly I had been erased from the family narrative, something broke in me, and something else, stronger and clearer, took its place. I returned to Boston with a new resolve. Instead of reacting emotionally, I gave myself a full week to reflect and plan. This wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about finally establishing the boundaries I should have set years ago. My first step was consulting with a therapist who specialized in family dynamics. Dr. Melissa Patterson listened to my story with compassionate professionalism before offering her assessment. "What you're describing is a classic golden child/scapegoat dynamic," she explained. "Families often unconsciously assign these roles, and they can persist well into adulthood. Your brother was cast as the one who needed protection and support, while you were expected to be self-sufficient." "But why?" I asked, the question that had haunted me for decades. "Why him and not me?" "Sometimes it's because one child reminds a parent of themselves or their own unresolved issues," she replied. "Often, the more naturally capable child gets less attention precisely because they need less intervention. It's not fair, but it's common." With Dr. Patterson's guidance, I began to understand that no amount of achievement or support would ever change how my family saw me. The roles had been assigned long ago, and my parents and Jason were too invested in maintaining them to acknowledge the truth. My next consultation was with an attorney who confirmed I had no legal obligation to provide financial support to my mother or Jason, regardless of our blood relationship. Familial moral obligations and legal obligations are entirely separate matters, she explained. You're not legally responsible for the debts associated with a property you don't own. Armed with this knowledge, I undertook a detailed accounting of all the financial support I had provided to my family over the years. Bank statements, canceled checks, and money transfer receipts revealed a staggering total: $178,000 over 15 years, not including countless flights to Chicago, gifts, and other uncounted contributions. I researched family systems therapy, enabling behavior, and financial boundaries. I read books about adult children of emotionally immature parents and joined online forums where others shared similar experiences of family financial exploitation. With this foundation of understanding, I drafted a formal email to both my mother and Jason, clearly outlining my position. I explained that while I cared for them both, I would no longer be providing financial support of any kind. I included an abbreviated accounting of my previous contributions and expressed that I felt these had been neither recognized nor reciprocated. I set up an automatic response to any messages containing financial requests, politely reiterating my boundary and suggesting community resources that might provide assistance. And then I made the most difficult decision of all. I would take a 3-month break from all communication with my family to focus on my own healing. The decision wasn't made lightly, and the aftermath wasn't easy. My body seemed to process the grief my mind had been avoiding. I developed insomnia, lost weight without trying, and experienced anxiety attacks for the first time in my life. But I also began to heal in ways I hadn't thought possible. I joined a support group for adult children of emotionally immature parents, where I found understanding from others who had walked similar paths. For the first time, I could speak openly about my experiences without fear of judgment or dismissal. The first time I received a financial request from my mother after setting my boundary was a test of my resolve. Her message was carefully crafted to trigger my guilt. The property tax is due, and I don't know what I'll do if we lose the house. Please, Samantha. In the past, I would have immediately transferred the money, seeking that elusive maternal approval. Instead, I took a deep breath and replied simply, "I'm not able to help with that expense." No explanation, no apology, no justification, just a clear, firm boundary. Jason's response to my new boundaries was predictable: escalation. He began having relatives call me, each one armed with a script about saving the family home and your poor mother. To each one, I responded calmly, sometimes sharing documentation of my years of financial support, sometimes simply stating, "I understand your concern, but this is between my immediate family and me." Rather than leaving my mother without resources, I researched and compiled information about financial assistance programs for seniors in her area. I connected her with a local senior services organization that could help her explore housing options within her budget. I wasn't abandoning her. I was helping her find sustainable solutions rather than temporary band-aids. As word of the inheritance situation spread through our extended family, unexpected allies emerged. My father's brother Michael, who had always seemed to favor Jason, called me out of the blue. "I want you to know," he said gruffly, "that your father told me about the will before he died." I told him it wasn't right, but he said your mother had convinced him it was for the best. I should have pushed harder, and I'm sorry for that. His acknowledgement of the unfairness, while it couldn't change the situation, helped validate my feelings and experiences. I wasn't crazy or selfish for feeling betrayed. The betrayal was real. Throughout this period, my company proved unexpectedly supportive. When I finally explained the situation to my manager and requested to use some of my accumulated vacation time for self-care, she not only approved it immediately but shared her own experience with family financial manipulation. "Take the time you need," she said. "Your work will be here when you're ready, and so will we." That 3-week break became a turning point in my recovery. I spent time hiking in the Vermont mountains, journaling, and reconnecting with friends I'd neglected while prioritizing my family's needs. I began to rediscover who I was outside of the family-assigned role of provider and problem solver. Most importantly, I began to recognize my own worth separate from family approval or validation. 3 months into my communication break, I received a message from a family friend informing me that my childhood home was now in pre-foreclosure. Jason, facing his own financial pressures and gambling debts, had moved out, leaving our mother alone in a house she couldn't afford. My first instinct was to swoop in and fix everything, pay the mortgage, cover the back taxes, rescue my mother from the consequences of decades of financial mismanagement. It was the role I had played my entire adult life, after all. Instead, I took the information to my next therapy session, where Dr. Patterson helped me work through my conflicted feelings. You can have compassion for your mother without taking responsibility for her situation, she reminded me. There's a difference between supporting someone and enabling them. The next day, my mother called. For the first time in our adult relationship, I heard something new in her voice, humility. I know you said you needed space, she began hesitantly. But the house. Jason left, and the bank says. Her voice broke. I think I've made some terrible mistakes, Samantha. I maintained my boundary while acknowledging her pain. I'm sorry you're going through this, Mom. I can't help financially, but I'm willing to talk through options with you if you'd like. The following weekend, I flew to Chicago, not to write a check, but to have an honest conversation. We sat at the kitchen table where I'd done homework, where I'd shown my perfect SAT score, where I'd learned that achievement would never be enough to secure my place in the family. Why? I asked simply. Why did you and Dad leave everything to Jason and nothing to me? She started with the familiar justifications. Jason needed help. I was successful on my own, but as I calmly pointed out the flaws in each argument, something shifted. Slowly, painfully, my mother began to acknowledge the truth. It was easier, she finally admitted, tears streaming down her face. Jason would fall apart if we didn't help him. You always managed, no matter what. We came to depend on that, to expect it. It wasn't fair to you. It wasn't a complete reckoning, but it was a start. Over the next several hours, we talked more honestly than we ever had before. I explained how the lifetime of differential treatment had affected me, how the will had felt like a final confirmation that my contributions to the family meant nothing. I never wanted to hurt you, she said softly. I just didn't see. I didn't want to see. Together, we explored practical solutions to her housing situation. I helped her find an affordable senior apartment complex with activities and community, but I was clear, I wouldn't be providing the security deposit or covering the rent. She would need to sell what remained of value from the house, furniture, jewelry, my father's remaining collectibles, to fund her new start. While helping her research housing options, Jason showed up unexpectedly, furious that his mother was abandoning the family home. You can't just give up, he shouted, glaring at me as if the foreclosure were my fault. Samantha should be helping us save the house. That's what family does. For the first time in my life, I stood my ground against Jason's intimidation tactics without flinching or backing down. The house is in foreclosure because you accepted an inheritance you couldn't maintain, I said calmly. Mom is finding a sustainable living situation. If you want to save the house, you're welcome to get a mortgage of your own. My mother watched this exchange with new eyes. Later, she confessed, I've never seen how he talks to you. Has it always been like that? Yes, I said simply. It has. The house eventually went to auction, and I stood with my mother on the sidewalk as strangers walked through the home where I'd grown up. It was painful but also cathartic. The physical embodiment of the old family dynamic was being dismantled, making room for something new, something healthier. While cleaning out the remaining possessions before the new owners took possession, I made a discovery that changed everything. In my father's home office, tucked behind a row of accounting textbooks, I found a leather-bound journal I'd never seen before. Inside, in my father's distinctive handwriting, were private reflections spanning the last 5 years of his life. Many entries focused on family dynamics, and as I read, my hands trembled. My father had been aware, painfully, explicitly aware, of the favoritism that had shaped our family. Watch Samantha help her mother with the tax forms today. One entry read, "She's so capable, so steady." We've always leaned on that strength, perhaps too much. Meanwhile, we keep rescuing Jason from his own mistakes. I fear we've crippled him with our help while taking Samantha's strength for granted. In another entry, dated just 2 months before his stroke, advised us on her investment portfolio today. "She's built more wealth by 33 than I managed by 50. So proud of her accomplishments, though I rarely say it aloud. Wonder sometimes if she knows." I shared the journal with my mother, and the entries became a catalyst for deeper, more meaningful conversations about our family patterns. She read my father's private thoughts with tears streaming down her face, especially the entries where he questioned the fairness of their parenting and the wisdom of their estate plans. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew it wasn't right." That acknowledgement led to my mother's first genuine apology, not the defensive, "I'm sorry you feel that way" of past conflicts, but a true recognition of harm done. "I failed you as a mother," she said, holding my hands tightly. "I can't change the past, but I want to do better now if you'll let me." Jason initially refused my invitation to participate in family counseling, dismissing it as touchy-feely nonsense. But as his own situation deteriorated, eviction from his apartment, Brittany leaving after discovering he'd borrowed money in her name, he finally reached his own rock bottom. Our first family therapy session was tense and difficult. Jason arrived defensive and angry, ready to blame everyone but himself for his circumstances. But the skilled therapist created a space where decades of dysfunctional patterns could be named and examined. "You've been cast as the golden child," she explained to Jason, "and Samantha as the responsible one. These roles have limited both of you and damaged your relationship with each other." Jason's initial response was rage. "So everything is mom and dad's fault? I'm just some puppet who couldn't make his own choices." "No," the therapist replied calmly. "But family patterns are powerful, and the first step to changing them is recognizing they exist." By the end of that session, something had shifted. Jason's defensive anger had cracked, revealing the insecurity beneath. "I've never been good enough," he admitted, his voice breaking. "Not like Samantha. She always did everything perfectly." "I wasn't perfect," I countered gently. "I was just afraid to fail because I never got the unconditional support you did. Every achievement was just meeting expectations, never exceeding them." It was the beginning of a new understanding between us, not an instant repair of decades of damage, but the foundation for something healthier. Over subsequent sessions, we began the painful work of dismantling the family mythology that had shaped our lives. For my mother, the process involved acknowledging how her own upbringing had influenced her parenting. "My parents always compared me unfavorably to my sister," she revealed. "I swore I'd never do that to my children, but instead, I overcorrected with Jason. I was so afraid of making him feel inadequate that I never held him accountable." These honest conversations created space for a new understanding of how our family dynamics had harmed all of us in different ways. Jason had been denied the opportunity to develop resilience and self-sufficiency. I had been denied recognition and emotional support. Our mother had trapped herself in a cycle of enabling that ultimately contributed to my father's financial stress and perhaps even his health problems. Most importantly, we began to understand that helping often wasn't helpful at all. My mother's recognition that her support of Jason had actually hindered his development was particularly powerful. "I thought I was protecting you," she told him. "Instead, I was telling you that I didn't believe you could succeed on your own." These realizations didn't instantly transform our family. Jason still struggled with accountability, my mother sometimes slipped into old patterns, and I occasionally found myself taking on the problem-solver role out of habit. But we now had the awareness and language to recognize these patterns and make different choices. One year after the will reading that had shattered my world, my life looked remarkably different. I had accepted a promotion to chief financial officer at my company, moved into a larger apartment in a quiet Boston neighborhood, and established a healthy, balanced relationship with both my work and my family. My mother had surprised us all with her resilience and growth. In her senior living community, she had discovered a talent for watercolor painting and formed new friendships independent of her identity as wife and mother. She took financial management classes at the community center and, for the first time in her adult life, managed her own budget successfully. The most significant change in her life, however, was her newfound independence. Using a small inheritance from her sister, she took her first-ever solo trip, a 10-day tour of the Southwest National Parks she had always dreamed of visiting. The photos she sent showed a woman I barely recognized, standing confidently at the Grand Canyon's edge, her smile more relaxed and genuine than I could remember seeing in decades. Jason's journey was slower and less linear, but equally real. After hitting rock bottom, couch surfing with increasingly reluctant friends, facing collection calls for unpaid debts, he finally accepted that change had to come from within. He found steady employment at an automotive parts store, work that was neither glamorous nor lucrative but provided stability he had never prioritized before. More importantly, he enrolled in a financial literacy course and, on his therapist's recommendation, began attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings. The gambling addiction he had hidden for years was finally being addressed, one day at a time. Our sibling relationship transformed from competition and resentment to limited but healthier contact based on clear boundaries. We spoke monthly, focused on the present rather than rehashing past grievances. We would never have the close sibling bond depicted in television shows, but we had something more authentic, a relationship based on who we actually were, not who our family mythology had cast us to be. My own transformation was perhaps the most profound. Through therapy and boundary work, I had released the desperate need for parental validation that had driven me for so long. I recognized the strength it had taken to survive my family dynamic, to achieve despite the lack of emotional support, to build a life on my own terms. Where holidays had once been exercises in obligation and disappointment, I now created new traditions based on joy and mutual respect. Some years I visited Chicago, other times my mother came to Boston. Sometimes Jason joined us, sometimes he didn't. The rigid expectations of perfect family gatherings had been replaced by more authentic connections. 6 months after she moved into her senior apartment, my mother sent me a handwritten letter that I now keep framed on my desk. "I failed you in so many ways," she wrote. "I took your strength for granted and punished you for your independence. I can never change the past or repay what was taken from you, both emotionally and financially. But I want you to know that I see you now, your generosity, your resilience, your success that came not because of our support, but despite its absence. I am more proud of you than I can express, and I hope to spend whatever time I have left showing you the respect and love you have always deserved." That letter, more than any inheritance, was the acknowledgement I had craved my entire life. It didn't erase the past, but it created space for a different future. My perspective on family obligation transformed completely. I now understood that true support meant empowering others, not enabling their dependency. When colleagues confided about their own family financial dramas, I shared my experience and helped them identify patterns of exploitation they might not have recognized. Financial therapist Olivia Taylor invited me to speak at several workshops on family financial boundaries. "Your story resonates with so many people," she explained. "Adult children are the fastest-growing demographic facing financial abuse, often from the very parents who should be their greatest supporters." The relationship between Jason and me would always bear the scars of our upbringing, but something unexpected happened as we both continued our individual healing journeys. After completing 6 months of addiction recovery, Jason asked to meet with me privately. "I owe you an apology," he said, the words clearly difficult for him. "I resented you for being everything I wasn't. smart, successful, together. I told myself you had it easy, that you were mom and dad's favorite, even though deep down I knew that wasn't true. I played a role in driving you away from the family, and I'm sorry for that. His acknowledgement didn't instantly repair decades of damage, but it opened a door to something I had never thought possible, a relationship with my brother based on honesty rather than competition and resentment. The most unexpected gift of this painful journey was the freedom it ultimately provided. By losing my inheritance, the tangible representation of parental approval I had unconsciously sought my entire life, I was forced to recognize that the true inheritance worth having wasn't listed in any will or trust document. My real inheritance was the resilience I had developed, the success I had created, the boundaries I had learned to establish, and the authentic relationships now possible without the distorting lens of family mythology. I had lost a house, but gained something far more valuable, the ownership of my own story. The irony isn't lost on me. Being excluded from my father's will ultimately forced me to claim my most valuable asset, my self-respect and freedom from toxic family patterns. Sometimes, what appears to be the greatest betrayal becomes the catalyst for the most profound growth. Looking back now, I can see that text message, "The mortgage is due," as the moment my real life began. The inheritance I ultimately received wasn't listed in any will, but it's more valuable than any house or savings account could ever be. Have you ever experienced a family betrayal that ultimately led to unexpected personal growth? Share your story in the comments below. And if you found value in my journey from heartbreak to healing, please like this video, subscribe to my channel, and share with someone who might need to hear that family obligation should never come at the cost of self-respect. Thank you for walking this path with me, and remember, sometimes losing what you thought you wanted opens the door to what you truly need.